Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sustainable Finance Podcast. My name is Paul Ellis, and I'm your host for these programs about developments in this fast-growing industry. Climate Aligned is building the world's first human-led, AI-assisted platform with the ability to analyze any bond issuer, borrower, bond, or loan against any standard, framework, taxonomy, or expert opinion in a fully customizable way, thanks to generative AI. I'm excited to have Krista Tukiainen, Climate Aligned's Chief Commercial Officer, as my guest for today's episode of the Sustainable Finance Podcast. Building on the new generation of large language models and tools, Climate Aligned is on a mission to change investor and capital provider workflows for the better and for good. Krista believes there is enough money in the world to solve the climate crisis, and much of it is funneled through debt capital markets. We will hear more of her story in a moment, but first, I want to say a few words about our sponsor. If you're tuning into this podcast, you already understand the crucial role finance plays in the transition to a sustainable future. With the right individuals leading the way in top companies, sustainability becomes more than just a buzzword. That's why we're excited to have Acre as our sponsor. As a world-leading sustainability search and recruitment company, Acre enables organizations to create real change by embedding and developing purpose-driven people in their teams. Visit the Acre website to learn more about their latest opportunities or to get in touch about building your perfect team. Hello, Krista, and welcome to the Sustainable Finance Podcast.
Hi, Paul. It's great to be with you today.
Yes, we're excited to learn about what Climate Aligned is doing, and you're going to be featured during COP28. Is that right? Climate Aligned is scheduled to do an official launch of its generative AI platform at COP28 on December 5th. 2023. So please tell our followers about this exciting opportunity.
Yes, very happy to. Indeed, us, like many other people, will be making their way towards Dubai in the UAE for COP28, pivotal moment, as we know, in the sustainable finance and overall climate action calendar, if you will. So Climate Aligned, as you there prefaced, and thank you for the kind introduction, we're a fintech startup company based in London. So I'm tuning in from London today. We're about a year old. We're building this generative AI powered software for investors and also bankers engaged in the bond and overall debt capital markets to help them pinpoint opportunities and be able to conduct these analyses and sort of workflows around sustainable finance with a climate focus to make moving capital into the right places just that little bit, or hopefully quite a bit easier to do in practice. And we've been doing this sort of in-depth exploration of the problem space, if you will. So we've spoken to at least 60 professionals in the last 9 months or so. And based on their insights, really started to see how you can put some of this technology, including the things that power things like ChatGPT, which a lot of people will have heard of in recent months, into actual industry grade use. And we'll talk about what that means in a moment as well. And based off of that exploration and our technology development, we're now in the sort of crunch time and getting ready to actually launch the platform for customers to use. And we'll be hosting actually a number of events at COP, but the main one will indeed take place on December 5th. So we're really excited to not only have launched the company from having built sort of under the radar for the last year. We did that at the start of September, but now we'll actually be able to show people what the product is all about.
Great. Now, you're developing this platform with partners who are looking for an edge in their decision-making, starting with the bond market. Why did you start with the bond market?
Yes, and that is a good question. So first, there was a kind of obvious fit in terms of my background. As you know, we've discussed green bonds and climate bonds as a mechanism for a while now. And my background is I spent the last several years working at an NGO called the Climate Bonds Initiative, which was the first in the world to put in place this idea of how do we classify things that are sort of already aligned with a climate resilient and low carbon future, and those that maybe need a little bit more work to get there. So they popularized this concept of a taxonomy. And I spent a couple of years there leading the data and analysis and sort of market intelligence work, as we called it, in terms of getting that information operationalized. So deploying some of those standards that were being developed together with market makers across the world and getting actual usable investor ready data out there to the world. And it turns out that that's obviously quite a manual process to do. And it's really hard to keep up with all the sort of varying definitions, especially now that luckily many, many more regulators and other parties are getting involved in developing those rule sets. So we've noticed there was a gap in the market. And at the same time, some of these technologies around the AI and machine learning side were coming to kind of market readiness, if you will. So there's an element of my background, but also to those who may not be as familiar with the bond markets, it is the largest capital market segment in the world. So the last I checked on Bloomberg a couple of days ago, the outstanding volume was somewhere around 167 trillion US dollars. And that is obviously a lot of money. It's also how we're going to be directing a lot of the investments that are necessary to either refinance existing assets and then to finance the development of completely new assets and projects, especially in infrastructure, but also just generally changing supply chains and value chains in major industries. That will be done through debt capital rather than equity, though it obviously also has a kind of a big role to play in this. And maybe because of that, there had been these sort of fairly well-established mechanisms of green bonds and other what we call labeled bonds. So bonds where an issuer, company or country or other type of entity will go to market and sort of ask investors for a specific amount of money that will then be ring-fenced or earmarked only towards sustainability-related outcomes. So it was kind of a logical place to start to see how we can make those types of workflows more efficient and then start to connect them to being able to assess the transition potential and progress for entire issuers and sectors and even countries. And there's really a dearth of solutions for bond investors at the moment. If you're investing into bonds or other debt or fixed income instruments, you're looking at different types of holding patterns, different types of timeframes when you're engaging with the issuer or the financing instrument or security, which means that the signals for progress that you look for are very different than they would be in, say, public equity markets, which tend to be a lot more liquid. So you might be holding onto a green bond or another type of bond for several decades even, which if you're a big bondholder, then that means you have a lot of power to sort of demand to see changes in an issuer's behavior as well. So those are some of the reasons why we decided to start here and then expand into covering other asset classes in the near future as well.
Yes, and for comparison purposes, I believe the public equity markets on a global basis are valued at somewhere between $85 and $90 trillion. So it's about half the size of the global bond market. Now, how will your platform enable original insight using trusted and transparent AI speed and scale?
Yeah, that is the $1 million question, isn't it? So I'll start by what we actually do and then talk a little bit about why we think this is revolutionary and importantly, why the intention of putting artificial intelligence and machine learning to industry grade use here, we think makes a lot of sense and isn't intended to put anyone out of a job, but really to make the expert humans' workflows just a lot easier so we can focus on the hard problems that still need solving in the climate crisis. So what we're able to do by combining the specifically created and trained and tuned large language models, so things that haven't been trained on the entire internet, but really on sustainable finance relevant data only, is to retrieve and access data at scale, which means that investors and other also sell-side sort of research analysts and similar people have timely and sort of high coverage data sets at their disposal. So instead of having to go online to, say, Google and search for PDF documents individually and not really knowing when things get updated, you can get access to those things through an automated pipeline at the scale of your entire investable universe, or maybe in the case of a bank, your entire potential customer universe. Then we get into the actual use of the language models. So we are able to, by training and tuning these models with the sort of specific data, but also very specific questions, we can process insights out of these data at scale, which obviously enables the kind of specific answers to generic questions, but also very detailed kind of criteria, which a lot of these assessment frameworks, taxonomies, classification systems, and the like are made up of, which then makes the assessment by definition also very customizable. So in the event of, definitions changing, either in internal processing from, say, an asset manager who's decided or noticed evolutions in client demand, someone doesn't like nuclear power anymore, someone wants to emphasize green solutions versus transition investments, and so on and so forth, or regulators updating their taxonomies, the SEC introducing new rules, incentives being put in place in the economy, like the US IRA, for example. You don't have to go through a manual redo of, assessment spreadsheets when that change takes place. Instead, you can just run the same set of data or an updated set of data against the tooling that's powered by these language models and get the updated results in what's very close to real time. So we can see how this starts to become a huge time saving in terms of when we're actually doing the mapping of what qualifies against the specific set of definitions.
Now, I'm assuming that same kind of transparency being developed would apply to different use cases for bond proceeds. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can do this kind of analysis at any level, really, looking at, obviously, when we're thinking about the labeled bond market, so green, social, sustainability linked, or even transition bonds, which are fewer, but will continue to sort of proliferate as these segments of the asset class grow. We can look at just the kind of ring-fenced pool of what has actually been financed, either at the stage when an issuer makes a promise, so that's typically encapsulated in a green financing framework and some kind of second party opinion or an equivalent set of data, if you will, and then confirmed or kind of tweaked at the post issuance stage. So you'll see a use of proceeds and an impact report. So we can run those things through the assessment pipeline, and then we can start to connect the dots, which is really crucial. Based on both the regulatory frameworks that are evolving, but also what investors are telling us on being able to connect the dots of, how do these labeled bonds and their use of proceeds impact the issuer's profile? So how significant is a bond issuance program for an entire company's activities? And are they actually using these funds to move themselves onto or down a net zero transition pathway or an equivalent way of capturing progress? And we can also do that at country level for those investors who invest into sovereign debt, which is obviously, again, something like 3/4 of the entire bond market. So countries borrowing money from investors is a huge piece of the net zero puzzle overall.
Krista, how is Climate Aligned partnering with asset managers and investors to test your generative AI platform?
Yes, this is the exciting part, isn't it? So I alluded previously a little bit to the sort of exploratory research process that we've gone through, which I have to say I've been so pleasantly surprised, or not even surprised. People have confirmed my suspicion that there are a lot of people working in sustainable finance who genuinely care, not only about their customers and the integrity of their own work, but also the real world impact that we now have to make to draw down emissions and build resilience. So folks have been very, very generous with giving some of their time to us to talk through the challenges in their workflows. So we started from there, and now we're sort of making that funnel a bit narrower in terms of having built much of the product. We are inviting asset managers and banks to attend what we call a design partnership program, which is effectively our way of characterizing how we do structured testing. And this is typically in the format of something like a monthly call or a meeting if folks are here in London in person, or we happen to be, crossing paths at places like New York Climate Week, where we just met as well. And then we will be able to show the latest iterations of the product and get specific feedback on features and usability and interfaces and so on. And then that process will culminate to the actual, final version of the product being able to be tested as a fully, end-to-end functional version, which will be done by early December, as we discussed. And I should say that for any people working in the sell side or banking in general, we are going to be kicking off another design partnership cohort in January, which will be solely focused on banks. Development banks are also very warmly welcomed and encouraged to join us to explore these use cases as they relate to really sort of localized funding and also some blended finance applications as they relate to the climate capital puzzle, if you will. And finally, I'll say that from obviously then the launch itself, the follow-up will include obviously inviting everybody to test the product. But if there are any folks who are now saying, okay, this sounds really relevant, then there's ways to get in touch and get involved also before the end of the year.
That's great. So as you develop this process of testing and working with different potential users of the platform, please keep us in the loop on any white papers you develop or any research that we can attach to the program, either before we launch it to begin with or anytime after it's up, because we have the capability to do that. Now, one of the things that your website talks about is the passion that you and your team are bringing to this work. What brought that out in people to start with? Tell us about that.
That is a lovely question. I really appreciate it. I'll talk a bit about the founding team first, and then I'll talk about the rest of our group. So, as I mentioned, we're a small team, growing team. Currently 7 staff, 2-person founding team, myself and Alexi. We're both from Finland, from north of Finland, and we've always worked on kind of environment and sustainability related topics. Maybe it's something to do with having grown up in this sort of very privileged when it comes to access to nature and natural resources type environment where you have, lakes here and forests there and everywhere. And you just you grow up in this mindset of really wanting to do everything you can to protect that. And especially now that we're starting to see, 30 plus centigrade degree temperatures in the Arctic and all these impacts of globalized and localized impacts of climate change, I should say, in different parts of the world. And so we set out to sort of develop this company and build a team of people who genuinely share that vision of we can bring technology together with the other big levers of the economy to make a real impact. And in this case, it's obviously finance for climate solutions and for the climate transition. So we have folks, we have a full stack engineer who just joined from Microsoft. And we realized as part of the interview process that though we weren't asking for this kind of qualification, he had voluntarily decided to go and do a climate policy master's degree here in London at one of the universities. We've also got someone who is a native person coming from India, so he's got a very different kind of point of view to these sort of some of these climate challenges. And we've talked a lot about also the kind of climate equity piece there of how can we realize a just transition in the context of somewhere like India, which is the world's most populous country, and even a colleague all the way from New Zealand who then comes from a completely different context. So we bring all of those perspectives together, and sometimes it's an in-depth debate about a piece of policy making or legislation like the IRA, or it could be, sharing the best vegan recipes for making, I don't know, scallion or whatever it is. So this manifests itself in several ways. But I have to say, as a new person to the tech industry, it's been also such a great thing to witness our technical team and just generally, going through recruitment processes for engineering capabilities that are so specific, where folks could choose to just go and work for big tech companies who are, I'm sure, offering very generous compensation packages, but instead they decide to take, the leap of faith that's required to do something with a very early stage startup, and because they really believe in the mission. So there's lots of good people with amazing, diverse skill sets now, putting them to use to try and get us out of this crisis, or at least manage the fallout. So I'm very privileged to be a part of that, if you will.
That's wonderful. Well, Krista, where online can our listeners learn more about Climate Aligned, and how can followers of the Sustainable Finance podcast contact you with questions about the topics that we've discussed in today's episode?
Thank you for asking. So you can go online to www.climatealigned.co without the M, so .co. You can find all of our contact info on the website, but you can also email me directly at krista@climatealigned.co, and the email addresses are the same for the whole team. You can find us on LinkedIn and X, or formerly Twitter as well, where we tend to share content quite regularly, not only about what we're doing, but also what we're seeing in the industry, and kind of plugging events where you can meet us in person. And of course, to those who are attending COP28, we'd love to hear from you, whether it's to attend some of the events that we're hosting or speaking at, or otherwise, organizing a one-to-one discussion or a sort of coffee chat whilst we're sort of all there in Dubai for a couple of weeks. So I'd start there, and I look forward to hearing any and all feedback and reflections on the product, and more broadly on the kind of spaces where, technology, climate change, and finance converge.
Well, thank you very much, Krista Tukiainen. And for our listeners, if you're ready to take your team to the next level, or if you're an experienced sustainability professional, visit the Acre website to get in touch. With the right individuals leading the way in your company, sustainability becomes more than a buzzword. Let Acre enable real change by embedding and developing purpose-driven people in your teams. And to our followers, join us again next week for another episode. I'm Paul Ellis, and this is the Sustainable Finance Podcast.